project at Sanitary Lift Station B, 5020 West Parkview Drive, to Super Excavators of Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, in the amount of $170,400.
Move to recommend to the Common Council.
Second.
Motion and a second to recommend. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That resolution is recommended. Resolution 3549, approving the award of a contract for the sanitary sewer work in the Lac de Coeur subdivision to Visu Sewer Incorporated of Pewaukee, Wisconsin, in the amount of $317,386.50.
Move to recommend to the council.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That resolution is recommended. Resolution 3550, approving the award of a contract for the 2018 sanitary sewer rehabilitation project to Visu Sewer of Pewaukee in the amount of $66,108.
Move to recommend to the council.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That
Move to
resolution.
adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. You do good work, Mr. Driscoll.
Wow, you're awesome.
Four things in 2.5 minutes.
We will now convene the meeting of the Common Council for Wednesday, August 15th. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's have another roll call.
Alderman Strelchuk.
Here.
Alderman Bushy. Here. Alderman Meyer.
Here.
Alderman Worth.
Here.
Alderman Garrell.
Here.
Alderman Brian Schneider.
Here.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider.
Here.
Alderman Nurbin.
Here.
Mayor Abendroth.
Here. We have a quorum. The first items on our agenda tonight are public hearings. We have 4. First one is for Ordinance 2018-1520, an ordinance amending Chapter 58 of the Mequon Municipal Code as it relates to filling, excavations, and berms. This was recommended by the Planning Commission on May 14th and recommended by Public Works on June 12th, and the first reading was at the Common Council on June 12th.
Move to go into public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The public hearing is now open. We have one person who is registered to speak, Joe and Eileen Hill. I guess 2 people.
Thank you, Mayor. We support vigorous ordinances that are enforced on that relate to berms, particularly in our case, residential berms. But we're skeptical that is currently drafted. There's some deficiencies that would not solve the problem that we're still experiencing. I'll take about 2 minutes to give you that background and then maybe make some suggestions on how you might improve that. First, we've lived on Hickory Lane for 25 years. A property owner who recently moved into the neighbor asked if they could install a fence around their property. We suggested, well, why don't you put in shrubs instead? So they did, but they put arborvitae around the entire property. They planted them not level with the ground, but in berms between 1 and 3 feet tall. Now, we didn't notice any problem for several years, and that's another point. Sometimes the damage that causes by the water being obstructed by dams and other things don't appear for a year, months, or years in the future. But from 2010 to 2015, we started to see standing water accumulate on that side of the property. The areas of our property sank, and we weren't able to actually get access to that. We weren't sure what to do at that time, so we contacted our alderwoman at the time, Connie Pouquet, and she put us in contact with Guy Hansen, the City of the Mequon engineer. I should say that all the correspondence that we've had with Mr. Hansen and the adjacent property owners are in the city files. We did receive some diagrams from Mr. Hansen, but in December of 2016, the city inspected the property line. Mr. Hansen letter noted that the arborvitae planted appeared to be acting as a dam, stopping the runoff and natural topography of the land contrary to ordinances, and laying out what was to be required to alleviate the problem. Fast forward to January 2017, the city, acting through its attorney, elected not to enforce the ordinance, stating that it would be difficult to do so as so much time has passed by. So we did contact Alderman Bushy. He visited the property, but we have not heard from him since January of 2017. Now, the adjacent owner continues to plant shrubs and berms along the property, all above ground between 1 and 3 feet tall. And we now have a continued problem of standing water along that property line. So previous versions of this ordinance, we believe, have not addressed, in our case, the activity, and because in part they have not been enforced. It appears that the new ordinance deletes all reference to specific and allowed and prohibited activities and moves the burden of that to the permitting process and actions by the city engineers and perhaps the city attorney, which in our case have been ignored. Will the adjacent property owners, if they go through the permitting process, be notified that a permit has been filed? Looking at a map, a topographical map, is not sufficient to know if there's going to be any problems a year or two down the road. If we'd have known that there was an ordinance and that we could have taken this action sooner, we would have done it. But again, we did not. So now we're still faced with a problem of trying to deal with all this, the impact of these berms that have been created and now are not going to be, the previous ordinance is not going to be enforced. We don't have any, quite frankly, any confidence that this new one will be enforced either. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the council regarding this ordinance?
I'd move to close public hearing then.
Second.
Motion and a second to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Ordinance 1521, ordinance amending Chapter 58 of the zoning code to amend the planned unit development for properties located at 6907 and 6929 to 6841 West Mequon Road and allow the construction of 2 office buildings of approximately 25,000 square feet for each building. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in June, and the first reading was at the Common Council on July 31st.
Move to go into public hearing.
Second.
Motion and a second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to address the council on this item? I don't see anybody.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Ordinance 1522, amending Chapter 58 of the zoning code to rezone the property located at 6125 West Chapel Hill Road from IPS, institutional and public service, to R3, residential detached, and to amend the land use plan map from institutional to residential to allow a single-family lot. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in June. The first reading was at the council in July.
Move to go into public hearing.
Second.
Motion and second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? But we are now in public hearing. Does anyone wish to address the council on this item? Seeing none.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and a second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The public hearing is now closed. Ordinance 1523, an ordinance amending Chapter 58 of the zoning code to rezone the property located at 2723 West Mequon Road from R3, residential, to IPS, institutional and public service, and to amend the land use plan map from residential to institutional to allow for the expansion of the existing cemetery associated with Lumen Christi congregation.
Move to go into the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and a second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Does anyone wish to address the council on this item?
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Public hearing is now closed. Just for your information, this ordinance comes up later on the agenda. and it has been requested by the applicant that it be tabled.
So, because I know that there's at least one or two people here, and since that's probably what we're going to do, I'd move to suspend the rules and table that item.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to suspend the rules. Call the roll.
Alderman Strelchak,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nerben.
Aye.
8-0, and the rules are suspended, and we will now take up 6D, Ordinance 1523.
Move to table.
Second.
Motion and a second to table. Call the roll.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nerben,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak.
Aye.
8-0, and that item is tabled. Moving on to personal appearances and public comment. Citizens wishing to address the council on any matter not on our agenda may do so at this time. We have one person who's registered to speak, Mr. Bob Wallerstein.
Hi, I'm Bob Wallerstein, live at 4707 West Parkview Drive. Been a resident of the city for roughly 46 years, and I have two comments to make. Number one, this is reference to Foxtown. When this originally was proposed, there was an offering, not a formal offering, of putting monies together to pass on to the city to update the swimming pool. The figures that were kicked around was something like in the 7 figures. And as of today, as far as I know, nothing ever happened on this other than it was suggested that this money would be available for the improvement on our swimming pool. And as far as I know, as of, again, today, nothing's been done. That's one issue. The other issue, again, I've been a resident for 46 years, and I never believed I was going to stand in front of the Common Council and say, I want my taxes raised, which is, this sounds ludicrous, but basically, I'm on a park board, among other things, and we did a survey of our properties, and there's a number of properties, parks, that need some improvement. All I know about deferring maintenance is very simple. If you defer it, it winds up costing you more to repair it down the line. We're taking an aggressive approach on a park board. We put some numbers together, and we hope that when we stand in front of you for the budget hearings and we propose what our budget is and propose why we're asking for this money, we would get a fair hearing. That's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallerstein. Move on to public officials' reports. I'd like to let everyone know that the 6th Annual Taste of Mequon Festival will be held on Saturday, September 8th from noon to 9 p.m. on Cedarburg Road, right out here in front of City Hall. The festival's committee has planned a great day of family fun and community celebration. There will be 21 food and beverage vendors serving up a variety of dining options. Artists will have handmade goods on display. There will be lots of fun activities for kids. There will be art activities for kids. There's going to be an expanded fun zone with a bouncy house, a giant slide, an obstacle course, and other assorted fun things for the kids. Music kicks off with Danny Miller Band at noon, DJ Flux at 3 o'clock, and Left on Sunset at 6 o'clock. The Mequon Thiensville Education Foundation will hold their 5K color run, and that will end at the Taste of Mequon, so that's always fun to watch. A complimentary shuttle will be available at Homestead High School and running to the Taste of Mequon starting at 11:30 a.m. and running until 9:30 p.m. every 15 minutes throughout the day, so you can find an easy place to park. Cedarburg Road will be closed for the event starting at 9 a.m. until the end of the event, and the Frank L. Weinberg Library will be open, although the parking lot will be closed. So plan to enjoy the day with family, friends, and neighbors, and mark your calendar for the Taste of Mequon, September 8th from noon to 9 p.m. Mr. Chapter, City Administrator.
No report tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. The next item on our agenda would be the consent agenda, which includes Common Council minutes of June, Special Council minutes of July, Architectural Board minutes of April, May, and June, Board of Police and Fire Commission minutes of March, April, Economic Development Board minutes of May, Festivals Committee minutes of April and June, Finance Personnel Committee minutes of May and June, Fire Department reports for June and July, Joint Mequon-Thiensville Bike and Pedestrian Way Commission minutes of April and June, Mequon Municipal Water Utility Commission minutes of March, Park and Open Space Board minutes of May, Planning Commission minutes of May and June, Public Safety Committee minutes of March and May, Public Welfare Committee minutes of May and June, Public Works Committee minutes of May, Sewer Utility District Commission minutes of April, Tree Board minutes of January, Fiscal Year 2017 Popular Annual Financial Report, which is an award-winning report, by the way, Resolution 3544, a resolution approving a development agreement for a 7-lot residential subdivision located at 14013 North Granville Road, which was recommended by the Planning Commission in May. Ordinance first readings are also included on the consent agenda. First readings will not be acted upon and not be discussed. They will just simply be read. Ordinance 1525, amending sections 5421 and 5424 of the Mequon Municipal Code as it relates to hunting within the Mequon Nature Preserve. A recommendation is forthcoming from the Public Welfare Committee on August 15th. This is a first reading. Ordinance 1526, ordinance authorizing a planned unit development amendment for the Hoff Group for the properties located at 12431 North Green Bay Road and immediately west of 12431 North Green Bay Road, 12424 North Green Bay Road, and 5555 West Highland Drive to allow a 28-unit, 14-building Plex development. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in July, and it is a first reading. Ordinance 1527, amending Chapter 58 of the Zoning Code to rezone the property located at 11409 and 11421 North Port Washington Road from B3 Office to IPS Institutional, and to amend the land use plan map from office to institutional to allow for a single-story hospital of approximately 16,900 square feet. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in July, and this is a first reading.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion and second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion or questions?
Yes, I would
Alderman
like to
Bush.
note that in the meeting that was just completed, Public Works, that we approved the Public Works June 12th meeting minutes with a modification that the vote was 3-0 in favor on Section D of the drainage appeal.
So, changed my motion to approve it with that change on the minutes.
And I'll re-second that.
Okay.
Never mind.
Okay. Anything else?
Next month.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is adopted. Moving on to ordinances. Ordinance 1520, amending Chapter 58 of the Mequon Municipal Code as it relates to filling, excavating, and berms. This was recommended by the Planning Commission on May 14th, the Public Works Committee on June 12th. First reading was at the Common Council on June 12th. Looking for a motion.
Well, I'll move to approve.
Second.
Motion and second to approve. Discussion. Alderman Worth.
Could staff perhaps address the comments by the person who spoke during the public hearing?
I cannot directly. I'm not aware of the specific issue. I'd be happy to go back and examine. Unfortunately, I'm not sure the issue is actually with the berm ordinance versus our drainage ordinance. I'd have to know more about the situation to know.
Okay, that's fair.
blockage of drainage is not allowed by ordinance, but that's not this ordinance. Unfortunately, if the berms were otherwise permitted and there is still a drainage issue, that I can't speak to.
And I don't remember the specifics. I do recall working on the issue. The problem really here is that these berms have been in existence for a long time. And so at some point...
like 2 years.
No, my understanding was that it was significantly longer. And the concern is that at some point the natural flow of drainage just is what it is. That, you know, even though there's now a berm that's there, it's been there long enough that I think any judge is probably going to laugh us out of the courtroom if we try to enforce at this point.
In that particular case, there was existing berm issues, and then it's still been modified and continued.
People can't hear you.
I'm sorry. In that particular case, there was existing older berm conditions, but it's been, according to Mr. Hill, it's been repeatedly modified and changed. And so I'm not quite sure how that falls under the rules, but it's an ongoing action that's still taking place.
Well, somebody could look at that. And then my second comment.
There certainly could be a new violation as well. So unfortunately, I can't speak to that.
If somebody could look at that, because it's a fair request. Then my second comment, if I could. I know it's not before us tonight. There's a set of regulations that are in our packet. That's not what's before us. But I can tell you, I was confused reading them. A couple of developers were confused reading them. I think the existing ordinance is clearer than the new regulations on what needs to happen with new berms. And I would hope perhaps somebody would re-examine those. And I guess the memo says that it's approved by Public Works, but I question whether any regulation can be approved by a committee, just like our finance policy was approved by the council. Our communications policy, even though done by a committee, was approved by the council. I would think that those regulations need to come back to the council also.
Kristen, were they approved as like an ongoing working process? That's what we said when we...
So the Public Works Committee did approve it at their June meeting. It's a living, breathing document. There's not a specific date under which they have to be approved or couldn't otherwise be amended or reviewed.
So I'll send some specific concerns regarding some language in there, not to change the substance, but to change the way it reads, because I think it's ambiguous.
I agree with you as well. I have those same concerns.
And we can certainly look at those and change. And likewise, if in practice we find that there is an issue with something, we would bring it back before for approval.
I'm pretty familiar with the drainage and the berm ordinance, and before Attorney Sajak finds it, I know it says in there word for word, it applies to any modification to existing berms. So it can't be too late to, if they're still modifying this berm, that brings it right back to date again. If you have a berm and it's 2 feet high and it's approved, then you make it 3 feet high, that's an ordinance violation. The
I
city
don't
should do
disagree,
something about it.
Alderman. The issue is that the changes that we were made aware of were on the other side of the property, which would not affect drainage at this particular case. If there are additional issues as it relates to the side of the property that the berm is on and the drainage is causing, that is a new issue that I was not aware of and something we will look at.
Well, I would still think that if they're altering or impeding flow of water in a certain direction, even on the other side of the property, it's still going to affect the berm that they put in before. I mean, it's all related. You can't stop the natural flow of water.
Again, there's no evidence that on the other side of the property that it's impeding any water necessarily that flows in that direction. Part of that may be because there is a berm on the other side of the property that's preventing the water from getting there. But again, we will look at it based on the information that we were provided this evening and see what's going on.
Yeah, we're not here to solve a neighborhood drainage issue. We're here to approve an ordinance change. Alderman Urban?
Yeah. Getting back to the ordinance, I think when this was at Public Works last, some of the things we wanted clarified at the time, which we gave approval to of the thing in its general form with some instructions to go clean up some language. Some of those language items still exist as we originally saw them. I think specifically in
Is it in the standard
7.2 Part D, there was the ground cover planted every 12 inches in a triangular pattern with
Yes.
4-inch pot sizes, and we were looking for some clarification on what, there was some confusion over ground cover versus plantings, and we thought there needed to be some definition, and it's not clear that that's been,
But that's not in that's not in what we're addressing tonight. That was my same point. It's not in the ordinance, it's in the reg.
You are correct. I will accept responsibility for this as we are continuing to learn Excella. The document itself has been modified per the recommendations of the committee in June. The packet items subsequent to that did not, because they remained the same through this process. Regardless,
so I'm not sure exactly what we're
but the
approving then.
the standard specifications are not
Ordinance.
before the council for approval. It's simply the ordinance.
So we're taking all the language out of the ordinance before we approve the other, so we'll have nothing
Well,
in the interim?
And I'll be honest, I'm not sure I'm the one to answer what the correct process is for approving the standard specifications. What I can tell you is the last 3 editions have been approved by the Public Works Committee, so that is the process that I followed. It's not for trying not to bring it forward to council, so we can certainly do that as revised by the committee. But the standard specifications at this point were otherwise approved by committee in June.
Alderman Garrell.
I see there's a 7.4 for retaining walls. It's 7.4, 7.41, 0.42. Is that brand new, or has that been there for a while?
No, there was formerly to my knowledge, nothing about retaining walls.
So that's a new addition to this filling, right?
Right, but that's in the standard specifications, not in the ordinance, but yes.
You don't know when it
Being
was.
asked to approve is pages 215 to 221.
Yeah, that's on 233. Okay, but I just had the question on the retaining walls. I have another question is, the people who spoke, when I read through this, I think I was the original one that I talked to Alderman Urban, and we got this before the Public Works, and it's been there for quite a while. I'm not sure that it's going to solve all the problems because, well, here's a question for you. So if somebody's building a house. They're going to build a house, and they give you a grading plan, okay? Are there any topographics? Do you do any topographics before they dig out their basement and put the fill in and all the other things? Does anybody do topographics on their property beforehand?
Yes, they're required to submit them as a part of
Since, they're before topographics. They're required.
the existing. So whatever they are, the date at which they apply for the building
Okay,
permit.
and then, so the house is built, okay, and it's inspected and they're given an occupancy permit. When does somebody come back and do topographics to make sure that there wasn't excessive fill put in?
They're not required to do so. The mechanism under which we do that is through the foundation certification to verify that they've met that, but the city does not have a requirement for a post-construction grading plan.
So that's the problem. That's the problem with this is they could raise that up and you would never know how much fill was there. In fact, when I was before the Board of Appeals, Guy Hansen said, I don't know if it was 20 yards or 200 yards or 2,000 yards that they put in there.
Well, to be clear, if they had to get a filling permit, we do now have some elements in here to verify the amount of fill that was placed
Right,
in the
and-
new regulation.
And in that case, they stopped it at 984 cubic yards, so they didn't have to go before the Planning Commission. And then they did well over 3,000 cubic yards by my calculations, but Guy Hansen said, we don't do that. We don't inspect it afterwards, and when the
Right,
time
that-
comes, we leave it. So I would
That's
like
why
to
we
see,
changed that in the revised standard specification, so that we do have the mechanism to do that.
to actually do the topographics and figure how much fill went in
It
there.
depends on this. We scaled it because we as it went through Planning Commission, there was not the willingness to have every 25 cubic yard fill permit require a topographic survey upon placement. So it is scaled pending the size of the fill permit in terms of what the expectation is of submittal post.
Then it's up to the resident to give you the trucking receipts for how much was trucked in.
Correct.
And
With
so
a visual
they could give you
inspection.
half those trucking receipts and not the other half, but there's no way to really tell.
If you have another recommendation, we'd be happy. We're trying to do something that's not too onerous or too expensive for those that are following the regulations. But if you want to require that everyone that gets a fill permit has to do a post-construction topographic survey, we can change the regulations.
That might be one way to prevent it. So depending on how much they're requesting, if they're requesting a lot of fill, we should do it post.
Well, that is the requirement right now. We do have it scaled. So, but there of course is a threshold that 1 cubic yard below that, they're not required to submit a survey, and that will happen at every single level unless we require all of them to submit topographic surveys.
So if it was at 1,000 yards, they could do 983, and then they would say, well, how are you going to know about the other, 17 cubic yards? They'll say, well, it was under that. So it's still I'll talk to you about this, maybe that we can come up with some type of a solution so that somebody doesn't put in 3,000 cubic yards when they say 985, and then they say, well, there's no way to tell. Where it's easy to tell when at the property line is a 7-foot variation from what it was before they built the property.
Of course, so that is part of this now is a visual inspection as well. So we do have various mechanisms put in place that I hope my staff is able to tell the difference between the placement of 983 cubic yards of fill and 3,000 cubic yards of fill.
Yeah.
If not, we can require everyone to do a topographic survey.
Yeah, it's just important because it can put a lot of stress on the neighbors, and it can put a lot of stress on drainage, and then there's no really remedy once it's done. So we'll talk about it.
Could I suggest perhaps that the standards and specifications return to Public Works for discussion?
Sure.
And if they want to redo those specifications, they can forward them to the council with their suggestions.
That's a friendly amendment to my motion. I have one other friendly amendment in the second recital. In the first line, there's a word "for." I meant to bring this up. That's kind of just floating there and doesn't mean anything. So if we could take that out. And the common council desire that regulations concerning the word "for" is somehow in the middle of that.
Okay.
And
Yep.
it's just a typing error.
Is there any other discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Stralcheck,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
8-0, and that ordinance is adopted. Ordinance 1521, amending Chapter 58 of the zoning code to amend the planned unit development for properties located at 6907 and 6929, 6841 West Mequon Road, and allow the construction of 2 office buildings of approximately 25,000 square feet for each building. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in June, and the first reading was at the special Common Council meeting on July 31st.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Alderman Meyer.
I've got a tough time voting for this. Going back to what the vision was for the arrival corridor, this really wasn't one of the visions to have 25,000 square foot buildings in the arrival corridor. Now, also the fact that when it was reserved first came in, they had indicated in the front area there was going to be some retail space inside of that front area, and now has expanded that to 2 buildings that are 25,000 square feet apiece. So one of the things we wanted to make sure, and we're going over the arrival corridor, and unfortunately we didn't think of these, was the fact of that we didn't want to have big, gigantic buildings along the road when we originally took a look at this. And unfortunately, this is what has come up. Now, it is within all of the pretty much rules and regulations of all that was set up for it, so I'm still going to vote for it, but I got a tough time in doing that because it's not what we really had planned in the beginning when we were doing the rival corridor.
Alderman Strelchak?
I agree with Alderman Meyer. I mean, really, a rival corridor in town center, I mean, what I've envisioned for that is more of a retail shopping district. And it's seeming that we're going to more of a professional service, and we're not getting as much of the retail shops as I was really hoping to get into town center. I will be voting for it. I'd also like to highlight that the applicant did add a second parcel to it, which allowed for the second building, so there would logically be a change to be able to add the second building in where that wasn't able to be done before. So that's why the two buildings are coming forward. I'm reiterating just the need for the retail in the center. I think that's really what the vision for the community is. I think that's the vision that the council had in place going into it. This is going to be a quality building. I know that for a fact. He'll have a Class A tenant in there. I'm sure of that as well. But again, just I like to reiterate, as we're building out town center, I'm seeing parcels being built up and not really enough retail going in as far as what we'd hope for as a council. But Alderman Meyer was correct. This is, per the code, it's going to be a quality building. It's going to be done right. I will be voting for it tonight, but just wanted to reiterate that need for retail in this center.
Alderman Schneider?
I think the fact that it comes before us seeking a variation in parking allowances after what we've all gone through with Mequon Town Center, I find that ridiculous. I would never bring that up. That's totally insensitive to the needs of the Mequon residents without even knowing what they're putting there to say that they don't need as much parking and try to alter the code that is required. It also allows up to 20 new residential units. We don't need any more residential units. We're getting saturated in residential units. We're getting more and more apartments. Prices are dropping and dropping and dropping. And we're just creating more competition, which competition's good, but we're creating more competition between developments that aren't even developed yet. These developments are rushing to get each other done, asking for sooner approval on this one so they can beat that development, so they can lower their price and fill up before the next one. We're causing more problems than we are solutions. I agree with Alderman Mayer about the buildings, about what would be there and the way they look. 25,000 square foot buildings. I personally don't like the design of the buildings. I don't think they go with the area at all. I won't be voting for it.
Alderman Urban?
It looks like Kim wants to talk about parking, so let's give her a chance to talk about parking.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. I just want to make a couple corrections to make sure that everyone is clear on what you're approving tonight. The PUD is authorizing the inclusion of an additional 2.5 acres to the existing development and PUD. It's not asking for waivers to any type of permitted or conditional use in the zoning district. Office is a permitted use in both town center and a rival corridor. It is not allowing for or asking for a variance to parking as part of the PUD. It also indicates that the open space that's being preserved as part of this development, dependent on the final selected tenants, could be utilized for the additional necessary parking. What we're pointing out is what the vacant land could allow for under the zoning. That's not necessarily their request. So what the approval is for the PUD is not asking for any variances to the town center or rival corridor zoning districts. It is the intent of the developer to have their tenants be office users. And furthermore, if there is any amendment to the otherwise open space of the development for this portion of the PUD. The PUD has a condition that that open space, that transition of that open space to some other use has to come forward for an approval by the Common Council to an amendment of that PUD. So any change to that open space, as you see as part of this plan, has to come back before this body. The council doesn't have the right, though, to prohibit a use that is otherwise permitted as part of the zoning district. If that's something that's under debate or consideration, that requires a text amendment to the zoning districts. The other thing is that the Planning Commission, as well as staff, also made some comments about the architecture and the design of the buildings. This has not yet gone through building and site plan approval, and the developer did get notice and understanding from the Planning Commission that there are different expectations in terms of architecture. And part of that includes the recommendation to break up the linear frontage of those buildings so that we do get some variation at that street edge.
Thank you, Kim. Any other comments? Only Gil?
So it's another 20 rental units, all right?
No.
No, these are 2 office buildings.
No, it could be.
Who were you
It's not even
referring to?
approval of the office buildings. It's just approval of the PUD change.
Right, to accommodate 2 office buildings.
The additional land uses would allow for 30,000 square feet of commercial space or up to 20 new residential units. That's what's written in here.
That's what the zoning district allows. That's not what the PUD is asking for. And any amendment to the change of that open space would require the developer to come back, just like any other proposed use allowed in the zoning districts.
So the zoning district is the basic, just to explain to everybody that's listening at home, the zoning district is the basic underlay of what's allowable under that space as a landowner and a developer. If they ask for a variance for it, that's another discussion item. But as they come forward with things that are allowable in that zoning area, we're hard pressed as a council to say no to it because we've already voted on it as a council to allow it in the zoning area as we created the ordinance in the zoning area. You know what I mean? I don't know if we're getting that or not, but
The developer of either one of these sites would have every authority to put up a 20 to 25,000 square foot office development, and the only approval they would need is to go through Planning Commission for building and site plan approval. What's before the council tonight is that they would like to utilize the remaining open space as part of an existing PUD, take another 2.5 acres that's adjacent to it to combine it to the PUD so that we can master plan the entire property. It is their intent to do 2 office developments. They are under negotiations with a potential user of the majority of one of those spaces. Because we don't necessarily know the user of the second office building, and that the tenant space may change, the requirements for parking may change. And if there is no market for another office development consuming that additional second building, the developer may choose, based on market conditions, whether it's retail or something else, to come back and ask the council to modify that. And whether the use, regardless of the use, the change of that open space feature would require an amendment to the PUD as the way it's written today.
Kim, and if I remember correctly from Planning Commission, they do have actually extra room for additional parking if they needed to add it for the additional user that would be allowable on the space.
Correct.
With the current land, and would allow them to be compliant moving forward with a tenant that might be a heavier parking user.
Correct, and I don't believe it's the Planning Commission's intent to waive necessarily the parking standards. He was indicating what his expectations for the parking demand is, why that's different than what the zoning code requires. The Planning Commission has the authority to waive those parking standards, either to make them lower or greater. But the point is that there's enough land to accommodate that additional parking should that be needed, and accommodate for the flexibility of the use of any of the construction that the Planning Commission ultimately allows there. So there's no variance to parking, and there is no non-conforming use being proposed as part of this approval.
Alderman Worth.
There are
If
no
this-
apartments.
If this wasn't before us tonight, and these 2.5 acres, the applicants separately came before us, they wouldn't come before us if they didn't do it as a PUD. They could put residential units on here without it ever coming to the council. But, I mean, I think it's the point that Kim has made, the only thing we're voting on is what's on this piece of paper, not the explanation that comes before and after it. And this doesn't give them the right to put, in fact, if anything, it's more restricted because it's going into a planned unit development,
Correct.
which would require our approval. If it's not in a planned unit development, by right, without ever coming to the council, they could build some apartments, not a big building, but they could build some housing units on there. So in fact, by voting for this, you are giving the council more authority to restrict units than you do right now. I think that's important to understand. And we ought to, in fact, I submitted today to planning staff an ordinance change to restrict future development of apartments that either is going to go to the planning commission or the public welfare committee in September. I mean, I don't want to see lots more big apartment buildings either, but I think that's not what we're voting on. So,
Any other comments? Call the roll.
Alderman Worth,
aye.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Based on John's explanation, aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchek,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
8-0, and that ordinance is adopted. Ordinance 1522, amending Chapter 58 of the zoning code to rezone the property located at 6125 West Chapel Hill Road from IPS to R3 residential, and to amend the land use plan map from institutional to residential to allow a single-family lot. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in June, and the first reading was sent to council in July.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchek,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
8-0, and that is adopted. Ordinance 1524, an ordinance amending Section 30-94 of the Mequon Municipal Code as it relates to restrictions on fireworks permits. Recommendation forthcoming by Public Welfare Committee, and the first reading was at the council in July.
The Public Welfare Committee voted unanimously, the two people were there, to recommend this to the council with one change. I don't have the specific language written down, but it
It was actually
effectively-
on the dais before everybody.
Oh, okay, so it's here in front of us somewhere that says,
If it occurs on a Sunday night, the alderman for the
Yeah.
district where the
It's
display will
notified.
occur shall be notified upon issuance of.
that way you can tell people in your district if you can notify people. It's only on Labor Day and Memorial Day Sunday nights.
Right.
And the opportunity, and it allows aldermen to let their districts know.
Need a motion.
Move approval?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any further discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Brian Schneider, Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchek,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
8-0, and that is adopted. Resolutions, first resolution is 3545, a resolution approving an amendment to the project plan of the Town Center Tax Increment District Number 3, City of Mequon, to allow for additional public project expenditures. This is recommended by the Planning Commission in July.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Discussion.
Is it going to staff first, or do you want discussion first?
Okay, we'll allow Kim to
Thank you, Mayor.
summarize Resolution 3545.
Sure. I'm just passing out a slide that we also presented at the June 4th Special Common Council meeting, which just gives a highlight of the financial performance of the Town Center TIF district to date. That's specifically related to the 8 redeveloped sites in the district. Tonight's action is to authorize an amendment to the TID project plan. According to Ellers, our financial consultant, as well as an opinion from the city attorney, an amendment is necessary should the council choose to make any type of expenditure out of the TIF district for the neighborhood in the future. This is essentially a requirement related to process and TIF law from the state of Wisconsin. So even with an approval to the project plan tonight, there is no authorization to spend any of the TIF dollars, and there's no obligation by the city to spend TIF dollars. The project plan, as we presented conceptually back in June, highlighted some of the opportunities. The project plan tonight has been through the Joint Review Board, which is a representation of the other taxing entities. It has also held a public hearing and has been acted upon by the Planning Commission. What it does is looks at projects that have been constructed and their current values so that we update what the estimated value of the TID district is, as well as a few anticipated projects and what we assume their values are. So this updated plan takes us through Spur 16 project, which is obviously approved and under current construction, through the proposed Foxtown project, which is through its approval process, but not yet quite starting with all of the construction, and then also through the Lakeside development proposal that you just considered as a previous agenda item. Other than that, we have not in this project plan anticipated any other development value coming into the district. This amendment is essentially based on the direction that we received from the council at that special June 4th Common Council meeting, as well as some of the direction that I think continues to be the consensus of the council from back in June of 2016 when we met over at Concordia and talked about where we want to take the TIF going forward. At both of these meetings, there was consensus by the council to address streetscaping, road improvements, ways to enhance the safety for crossing Mequon Road, contributing to on-street parking, as well as making alternative modes of transportation, bicyclists and pedestrians, a little bit more accommodating. In addition to that, we've talked about reevaluating some of the public improvements and amenities that were originally slated in the project plan that was approved in '08. Again, this amendment, as I've indicated in the staff report, and just want to make sure I'm reiterating tonight, this is basically the legal opportunity that you need to, or process-related opportunity that you need to take in order to have the option to even authorize expenditures in the future. Whether there's a request by the council to come back and make a public improvement, a process like the parking lot for City Hall, or a request by a developer for an incentive, you need to have this amendment authorized by the Common Council as well, finally, by the Joint Review Board, which is scheduled to take action on this next week on the 23rd. Certainly, the project plan contemplates the opportunity to make future incentives to projects, although it's not specified for any particular project at this point or any particular developer. You know, based on the performance so far of the TIF, and that's why I wanted to remind you of some of the benefits that we've seen in the success of the district so far, the incentives have been offered essentially at a no-risk type of incentive program, and we've partnered with developers for those 8 redeveloped sites. The value of those 8 redevelopment sites have increased by over 1,200%. The city's contribution to that has been a little over 6%, and the private market's contribution to that increase in value has been over 93%. It allows us to close the TID on time. It's generated 25 new businesses to date. We've collected over $400,000 in park and open space fees, or excuse me, park impact fees. Of the 28 acres, which is really only a third of the TIF district, a little less than third actually, we have a new value of 74.5 million in the TIF, and on an average per acre basis, that's for these 8 sites is $2.6 million per acre. Those are substantial numbers in terms of that private investment contribution that's been made. Any expenditure, again, desired by the city or by a developer would require separate and future action by the council. That's going to have to come back to you. I'm aware that there was some information that was circulated in the last couple days, and obviously we've heard over the last months some questions about TIF. I'm happy to follow up with the council in response to the most recent distribution so that I can give you information to make you aware of some of the accuracies that need to occur with some of those statements. Certainly in June, the council discussed the opportunity to provide an incentive for Foxtown, but as I said, that requires a separate action and it's not scheduled or on the agenda for tonight. Really, not authorizing an amendment to the project plan tonight would not only not allow you to make any future incentives, but it would also prohibit the ability to make any other future expenditure for the TID district.
Thank you, Kim. Questions?
I have a question. Oh, sorry, Glenn, go ahead.
Alderman Bushy.
Just quick clarification. I'm looking back at the notes from the June 4th meeting.
Sure.
And on that document, page 6, I know not everybody has it handy, but option A, it says, assume Spur 16's projected completion at $26.1 million in value by 2020. Assume no other value is generated in the district and no other expenditures are made. And the option is also not the incentivization of Foxtown development and no other project value added. It says the TID can close in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
And in our packet, it says right now that the TID is projected to close at 2028. So it could close in at 2026 on current projections. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. That was my question.
The statement on your sheet on your slide is based on the 8 redeveloped sites to date.
Explain that, please.
If there was a confusion in the closure date, it would be because of the 8 redeveloped sites that are addressed on that slide.
Meaning it's going to close earlier or later?
No, it's just there's 2 different numbers in here, comparison, and I'm not sure exactly which one you were referring to in the report. We have the opportunity to close the district out early in 2026, assuming the Foxtown project goes forward.
I thought the 2026 was assuming the Foxtown does not go forward. That was the option A that I just read.
Okay, what page is that?
It was on the June 4th packet, page 6, option A.
Option what?
A.
Okay, and that did include Spur 16? Okay. Okay, yep, sorry, I'm incorrect. 2026.
Thanks.
Alderman Schneider.
This is, I think, a more straightforward question, but on packet page 268, in the first paragraph, it references, it's estimated there'd be approximately $2.76 million available before 2023 through cash financing for any expenditures deemed necessary by the city. Mm-hmm. So am I understanding that to mean that that is included in the current, that will come back to the city as part of this current development in absence of any future development, meaning up through this slide?
Based on the projections in your current TID project plan, which assumes the development of Foxtown as well as the inclusion of that lakeside development project, that would give us the ability to find cash finance to the 2.7.
So are you saying in the absence of those developments there would not be this $2.76 million available for expenditure?
Correct.
Gotcha.
I'm surmising it'd be some number less than that,
Correct.
but not 0 either.
Correct. We ran through a number of variations in advance of that June 4th special common council meeting. Unfortunately, I don't have those numbers in front of me tonight to be able to say what that would be.
I think what that means is if we amended the plan, we could spend that much money without borrowing it, because we've got that amount of
Assuming those,
increment to play with and still close the project out on time.
yes, and there's
Not really, but on time.
There's a number of variables which we pointed out in the June staff report. I mean, there are some numbers in here, right, that are estimates based on project values coming in certain years in order to get to that cash finance number that you're seeing in the report.
I did have some questions there's some assumptions made in the revised project plan, some with regard to incentives, some with regard to amount of public projects. Were those numbers backed into based off of the capacity of the TIF to support, or was there a bottoms-up estimate on, like, the public projects? Is there a list of projects with some notional dollar values? Which direction do we come at it from?
Sure. So what we did at the staff levels, we took the original public improvements that were cited in the 2008 plan. Fortunately, in 2013, we did a status update with the council, and we looked at what improvements we made, how much we spent, and what was remaining in order to complete those projects. So the zones that you see in that spreadsheet, I essentially had a 5-year status report, and then I projected out an additional 5 years to get us to today's dollars. And so you're seeing basically a 3% per year increase over the last 5 years to accommodate a contingency of today's dollars of what it would take to get those projects done. Obviously, we're not constructing them in 2018, so it's still just an estimate.
Alderman Schneider, Alderman Gero. We'll start with Alderman Gero.
Age before beauty.
Yeah.
So in essence, what you're saying is we're going to authorize additional spending in the TIF. Is what we're going to say, or we're going to open, and it's going to be pretty much open-ended. We're not going to any amounts. We're just project by project. We're going to decide whether we're going to spend more on this, or we're going to offer incentives on this and incentives on that. But all really right now we're saying is, we're considering expanding it monetarily wise. We're going to more incentives in it because we've pretty much spent our incentives.
Well, you're correct in the first part, in that we're establishing a new budget as part of the TIF project plan. Dollars, but again, to make a future expenditure out of any of those line items, it requires authorization by the council. The state law doesn't necessarily force you to hold true to those exact dollars in those line item expenditures that are listed. So if you would choose not to, for say, do any incentives, you could shift those dollars to other public improvements without necessarily having to amend the project plan. They don't require you to be that precise.
Where's the limit? Where's the limit? Is there a limit on it? Is there a limit on how much we can spend? I mean, can we give Foxconn $4.5 million and somebody else $2 million in incentives? And is it going to be open-ended where we get into a situation where, well, geez, you did it for this guy, we have to be fair with everybody, and I have to do it for this one, and you have to do it for this one. Where does this end? Or does it come? I know it's going to come to us each time, but I know the argument already is always, well, if we did it for them, now we got to do it for them.
The project plan does not obligate you to do that. I mean, I think that's a policy and decision that the council can make. We would not want to go beyond we would want to stay within the realm of the project plan budget, because that's the point in the process that we're at right now. We've made expenditures equivalent to the budget of the original project plan, and per the direction of Ellers and by the opinion of the city attorney, in order to make any additional expenditures, because we've met that threshold, we have to go through this legal process in order to give us the right to make future expenditures, and at least acknowledge to the public that there's the potential or the option, should the council choose to in the future, to make those.
So for anybody who's watching on TV, which is probably usually not many people, what is the project plan budget? What is it? What is the number on it?
Now, Don, do you have that number handy?
In the project plan, it's on page 17, that we're adding to the existing document, and it's about $12 million of public improvements and incentives combined, and we've identified an additional, if there's borrowing done for any of the capital project, we've allowed for the interest expense on any borrowing in that as well. So the total budget is 15 million is about what can be supported between projects, interest expense, and incentives.
15 more?
15 million more than what was in the original plan.
Okay, so a number of us had, just wanted to make this point, a number of us has said again and again and again, especially around election time, that, I don't like TIFs, but we're stuck with this one. We're in the red. We have to make this work. So now we're coming out. We're getting into black. We're making it work. And now we're going to, well, maybe I do like TIFs. Maybe I'll add another 15 million. We could say that.
Again, this just puts the framework in place. It doesn't mean that you'll spend them. Those are decisions you have yet to make. It just and to answer the question, it's kind of a combination of, here's a priority of projects that were laid out by staff and how much can be supported. It kind of came from both directions to determine that.
Yeah, because when you look at what the projected, revised budget to do those original public improvements are from 2008 to 2018, you're at that 12 million mark. And I don't expect that we're going to do all of those or spend that level of funding. But
And again, the decisions of whether you spend it with cash or borrow, it really comes down to the cash is only available about 2.7 beyond the potential for the incentives to do projects. If you use cash only, which would have to be spent by 2023, you only have 2.7 million. So that condenses it down. If you do it with a borrowing, you can extend the recovery longer, and that brings the dollars up.
And that would have to be obviously another policy discussion as well.
Basically, amending the plan gives the council the option of whether they want to fund any more public improvements or provide any more incentives to anybody. You have the option. You don't have the option of doing that if you don't amend the plan. So it could be that you amend the plan and we don't spend any more money on anything. Okay? It's up to you what we spend money on. Alderman Schneider.
Okay, so we don't have anything planned for 2018 to spend this money on, correct? Nothing's in the works for public expenditures?
No, we'd like
So-
to, go ahead.
Okay, so next year, 2019, we might not do any of these public expenditures as well. We don't have a plan for those at any time right now. There is nothing planned.
Correct.
Only thing planned right now is that Foxtown wants $4.5 million. That's the only reason we're voting on this now. We could put this off and vote on it next year if we're voting for public expenditures, because we're not planning anything right now. So we could just push it off and take this up again some other time. The only reason we're doing it now is because they want $4.5 million.
There is anticipated use of TIF funds to assist with the City Hall parking lot. And again, given the feedback that we've received with the council both in June of 16 at our last update and in June of this year, there is consensus that there are public improvements that the council would like to make. And those will take time to work through and design and get approved before we can implement the projects. Part of the reason for administering a TIF district is that you're trying to encourage development to happen sooner than it might otherwise would if you just leave it up to the market. And again, I think the success of the project plan and looking at what the opportunities are for it, and given the conversation we've had about the request for Foxtown's incentive and the benefits, not only a development positive for the district, but a financial positive for the TIF district, I think that lends itself to this consideration as well. In terms of doing it now and not waiting. I mean, potentially delaying that project has both development and financial impacts.
That project would happen with or without our 4.5 million. They have the wherewithal to do it. They wouldn't have started the project if they didn't have it. They're just coming back to ask for it because they know they'll get it.
I don't know that that's the case, and I don't know that you know that's the case. According to the financial evaluation of Ellers, those projections in terms of their pro forma do not meet the industry standard in which a development team would go forward. And this is in part why we have the fast track formula, is so that we're not making those speculative decisions. The fast track formula has consistent and objective variables applied to it so that the city, or even reliance on our financial consultant, or the reliance on anecdotal information doesn't create a situation where you're making decisions not based on correct information. The fast track formula is a relatively low to no risk incentive program. Obviously, it's proven to be successful, but there's no risk because the project has to be constructed, it has to achieve occupancy, it has to meet a minimum project value per what the incentive required, and taxes have to be paid before any dollars are reimbursed. Furthermore, the incentive that we provide to a developer only goes towards demolition, environmental cleanup, and other costs associated with getting the project back to a greenfield slate. It doesn't go towards construction. In the Foxtown case, we are removing several acres of rather blighted and non-conforming uses.
But they knew that going in. They knew that going in, and they wanted that property. That's what they have to deal with.
Sure, and if you don't think that there's merit for the incentive, we can certainly have that discussion at the time that we bring forward the proposal, the negotiated and developed development agreement associated with the incentive. But to debate their particular project or the financial circumstances of their project and whether they're eligible for an incentive or not is really not what's on the agenda tonight. What's on the agenda tonight is an amendment to the project plan, which gives the council the authorization to offer incentives to any project, to any developer going forward under a fast track formula, and to make future expenditures that frankly we have been on the record of committing to do since 2008. So when your staff is out talking to developers about investing to the tune of 93% of the 74.5 million that's been created, we indicate that there is the intent to do so.
Alderman Irvin.
I know we're not voting on Foxtown's incentive tonight, but I think it's important to clarify. They've got a project value. It's estimated at $50 million. If they fall flat on their face and only achieve half that, they'd only get half the incentive. It would scale, wouldn't it?
Right, and there's
Yeah.
a limit obviously to the payback period of this.
Even if their valuation is way off and it only achieves half that, they would get commensurately less incentive.
Yes.
Based on that.
Yes.
So we're not voting on that tonight, but all we're voting on is the flexibility to maybe do something in the future, part of which is pay for things that are needed in town center, like our parking lot, which if we don't use the revenue generated by the increment in the TID is going to fall on the backs of the general taxpayer to pay for things like that. So if you vote no on this, you remove the flexibility to do that, and it's going to make the City Hall parking lot a Mequon taxpayer problem, not a TIF problem, TIF district problem. That's essentially what we're voting on, is the flexibility to maybe do something later. But it would include things that are needed that we know, like the parking lot, amongst other things.
Sure. And, I mean, there's a cost to this process, obviously, of going through this amendment, and there's a cost to members of the Joint Review Board and the other taxing entities, and that they're committing time because we have involved them in this process. You can certainly wait to do the amendment until you're ready to do some project, but you run the risk that, I mean, you duplicate the cost and the process that we've just gone through. And you also, run the risk of delaying that project, whether it's our own project or some private market project. You run the risk of delaying that because you need 2 to 3 months to get this project back up and running, and essentially it would be the same sort of budgetary legal framework that we're presenting to you tonight.
And isn't it true that all expenditures need to be made by 2023?
Correct.
Right. So it doesn't go on forever. You can only spend money until 2023 if you choose to spend money. Alderman Strelchak.
I think as a council, we really should look at the streetscaping and the gateway features, and that's part of this, and this gives us the right to review that and consider as a council, have things come forward to us and consider as a council how we want to approach that, if we want to pay for something, if we don't want to pay for something, and it gives staff the ability to bring that, proposals before us to review and see if that we want to fund it. This TIF is just, nobody wants to see just a developer handout. And as everyone's kind of indicated, including staff, this isn't just a developer handout. This is a vehicle in which we can address several of the issues that are going on in the TIF. Alderman Schneider asked, that he had an objection in a previous meeting where, well, if you build it on that side of the street, how are they going to get to the other side of the street? Well, if we approve this tonight, we can budget for something. If something comes forward, we can build a walkway if we choose to as a city. We can go out and get funding and use TIF funding, and then raise funds for that. We can do a gateway feature. We can do streetscaping and everything else. I mean, what we're doing here is we're developing a town center, and a town center has multiple components that go to it, and it's not only up to the developers to do those components. The city, with the TIF and the TIF funding, we're above what we needed to be at to have the TIF close, which we weren't when I first took office. It was a sinking hole. We didn't know how it was going to get fixed, and it was one of our goals to fix it, to get development in that area so that the TIF would close. Well, now it's closing, and we're having some funding to do some of the things that we've needed to do, and we've promised we would do, including the gateway feature, some streetscaping, and some final touches on the area that we'd finally be able to do. And we've had a couple really great developments, quite frankly, that I don't think that we had an idea could exist. We got a $50 million potential project across the street for Foxtown, and everyone's like, well, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. I mean, we got a $50 million project that's taking up a ton of street frontage of blighted land that, quite frankly, other cities would be begging to get fixed. And we've got that opportunity before us, and we've also got the opportunity before us from those tax incentives, or the taxable dollars to close the TIF early, to do some things in the area to finish it and have it be a synergist unit for the city, and to actually finish this project. I guess what I would kind of compare it to is like, we've all built houses, and you built a house, and the builders, like when they build like a bunch of houses, they stick in a couple trees here and there, but you really finish the landscaping. What we're doing is we're putting in the driveway, we're putting in the landscaping, we're finishing that house and making it a home, and we're making this town center a center area in which the city will come to, and they'll congregate, and they'll move from space to space safely. We can address some of those issues, and it'll look like a unit that we wanted to have all along, with it being a consistent downtown area. This gives us the ability to address that. We're getting hung up on the ability to provide TIF incentive, but every one of those votes has to come forward to council. We can debate that later. I think that what isn't also being said is, oh, why are we doing this now? Well, staff realized we need to do this now. It's here now. Let's get it done. What are we going to do? Put it off a year because we're going to feel better waiting? That doesn't make sense. You have a plan before you. It needs to be done. Let's vote on it tonight.
seems like Foxtown's become the subject tonight on this, but, basically, if you're looking to use this as a means to kind of stop the Foxtown project inside of it, by killing Resolution 3545, it kind of does. But it also hand ties us for the different type of projects that we may want to do going forward. I share a lot of your concerns with the Foxtown project, but I take a look at this as we are not voting on that right now. It is a means to stop the project if the vote doesn't go through. But like I said before, it hand ties us with some of the things we were, concerned about, safety crossing and Mequon Road, a number of different projects that were kind of looked at and we can possibly do. If we don't vote on it, we pretty much won't be able to do those projects going forward, which I think some of those things we need to do. Foxtown is something that we're going to address, and I don't like apartments, and I don't like all this stuff, but that's a different subject, a different time on it for me, and I may be addressing those issues when that happens. So tonight, because we're voting on the resolution so that we can do additional public projects, that's the reason why I'm voting for it, and my vote for it, don't be misconstrued with the fact that I'm endorsing the Foxtown project by any means, shape, or form. I'm giving us the opportunity to do projects and take a look at some developments that may come before us. That's my only reason why.
Alderman Bushy.
If I understand this correctly, my interpretation of what we're looking at here is that this is another mechanism outside of any of our traditional mechanisms of borrowing money, and in essence using the TID mechanism to borrow money in order to do the different projects that we're looking at. So I don't think we're precluded from other traditional mechanisms for coming up with funding for some of these other projects, such as the Gateway. I'm looking at this, all these documents that we look at, one of the underlying factors is we're always making this assumption of $26.1 million from SPUR 16. And one of the things I'm really concerned about is that that's in full force development right now. The impressive fun toys I remember as a kid, but on giant scale are all around. I want to make sure they're successful. And one of those ways to make sure they're successful, I would actually argue that it might be worth our while to kind of take a break or put some brakes on as far as putting out there that we're making our plans going forward, that we're going to start doing all these other spendings, potentials, whether it's Foxtown or any other apartments or whatever's going on, that the message is out that we're supporting what we already have in the pipeline, and we still have ample time before the end of 2022 that if this were delayed another year, where we could come up with a decision, and then when we have more concrete projects and amounts in front of us, then my opinion might be completely different by that point. But I would really like to see that these revenues, the value that we hear from SPUR 16 is actually hitting the mark, because we're basing a lot of other assumptions going on projected values. And looking at our chart, Foxtown, it's a huge sum, $50 million. I want to make sure that that's accurate based on what we're seeing going on the north side of Mequon Road.
We had, I just remember I think we had set aside in the original TIF $208,000 for the Gateway feature, and we spent that on other incentives. Now we're, and I don't think this Foxtown project's going to end. It certainly shouldn't end if we don't give them $4.5 million for demolition, which I think is extremely high. But then again, I'm not a developer. But I do know that in the history, and normally, and even in the history of Mequon, we did with the first, this TID 3, we got to our $9 million. We spent money on the Gateway on other things, and now we're going to look for another $12 to $15 million. The truth is, we'll have $12 to $15 million to spend, and typically government finds a way to spend it. So I think we're going to have one after the other after the other. I'm going to go back to it again. I remember when Cindy Schaefer first came with her, we bought the property for $1.5 million and, and then threw in a couple DPW buildings and another 12 acres of prime city land and sold it all to a developer for $1 because, dang it, we have to turn this thing into the black. We're way behind on this. Now we're ahead on it, and we're looking to just expand it. Nobody wanted the tip. Yeah, well, I'm against it. I'm against it. I was against it before I was elected, but now we have to make this work. Now we're voting to just expand it by another $12 to $15 million. That's just the simple truth on it. And yeah, well, there's no end to the wishes that we can come up with. Oh, we have to have a trailhead. I heard the trailhead might just be the beer garden. I heard rumors of that. Somebody told me, well, that's what the trailhead's going to be, spend money. We'll find ways to spend this money. And will there be an argument all the time, and we need this or we need that. That's where this is going. I won't vote for it. I won't vote for it because I said in the beginning, this thing, and all the way through, I was just happy that this thing is turning, and we're finally going to reach some point where we can pay it off. And the other thing is we're in a top of an incredible boom in the market. This market turns down. And we've got 500 adding another 100 from Foxtown, which I'm sure it'll be approved. People don't want the apartments, but they'll need them. We need to do it. And it's not any way, shape, or form a but-for. Isn't that, I don't see how you get sued for this as a but-for. They're already building on it. They're already, so... you can make all kinds of reasons why we should do this, why we should do this, why we should do this. Once we got the taxpayers' money, it's easy to spend it. And I think we'll spend it. We'll find all kinds of different reasons that we need. So you guys can vote for it. I'm not going to vote for it. I've seen this again and again and again. Slow it down. I think you're gonna have a mess with apartments. I told you this. We're talking about. I noticed in our packet it went back to the 2013 study. This 2013 study. Here, the people want this. The people want that. The people want that. They want added incentives. They want more development. But what you skipped saying is that 2013 study pretty much said that if everybody in the next several years who moved out of their homes and moved into apartments, you'd have 141 people. That's the math on it, 141, and you're building 500 rental units? 400 plus already, and now another 100? You're going to have a mess on your hands, and it's going to be subsidized, so that's all I have to say.
Any other comments? Call the roll.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider?
Yes.
Alderman Nurbin?
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak?
Aye.
Alderman Bushy?
No.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
Alderman Worth?
Aye.
Alderman Garrell?
Absolutely not.
Alderman Schneider?
No.
5-3.
5-3, and the resolution is adopted. Resolution 3538, authorizing the Second Amendment to the employment agreement between the City of Mequon and William H. Jones, Jr., recommended by Finance Personnel Committee in July.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion is second to approve. Is there any discussion?
Yeah.
Call the roll.
We're gonna all laugh.
Alderman Nurbin?
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak?
Aye.
Alderman Bushy?
Aye.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
Alderman Worth?
Aye.
Alderman Garrell?
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider?
Aye.
Oh, look how happy he is.
8-0, and that is adopted. Resolution 3539, clearing the personal property tax roll of delinquent accounts deemed uncollectible for tax roll years 2015 and 2016, recommended by Finance Personnel Committee in July.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Alderman Strelchak.
We're deeming some of these uncollectible, but they're still in business. I don't know how that works.
Mr. City Attorney.
It's really more of a accounting situation at this point. We are still, in many of these cases, still working on collection efforts for these amounts. but it just for accounting purposes, it makes sense to write it off at this point, and then we'd recognize additional gain if we were able to recover down the road.
Are we actively trying to recover?
We are.
And we'll continue actively trying to recover if we say yes to this?
Yes.
So then I could agree to that.
Alderman Strelchak,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Worth,
I didn't want to vote anyhow. Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Could have abstained.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Urban.
Aye.
8-0, and that is adopted. Resolution 3540, approving the land transfer of 6 acres from the Mequon Nature Preserve to the City of Mequon, and a first amendment to the lease and operating agreement between the City of Mequon and the Mequon Nature Preserve.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and second to approve. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That resolution is adopted. It was recommended by numerous committees along the way. Resolution 3541, approving amendments to the Articles of Incorporation and bylaws of the Mequon Nature Preserve in connection with reducing the number of board members each appointed by the City of Mequon and Ozaki, Washington Land Trust from 3 to 1, recommended by the Finance Personnel Committee in July.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That resolution
I
is
just
adopted.
wanted to thank the city for what a wonderful partner you've been and really helped us become successful. I know we've been working closely with Will on a number of issues as well as the mayor. And I know some of you were not here when this started, but the city really kicked this off with a $2.5 million. And we have raised well over 15 after that to make this happen. So just thank you for all your support and your help with these little issues that come up for us. So thank you.
And you do a terrific job, so thank you.
If you haven't been to the Nature Preserve, it's a trip worth taking. Just don't set off the alarm.
Resolution 3546, authorizing the execution of a second amendment to the offer to purchase between the city and the Hoff Group for city-owned land at 12431 North Green Bay Road,
Your Honor, I have to abstain.
extending the contingency deadline to December 3rd, 2018. This was recommended by Finance Personnel Committee.
Your Honor,
Move
I have to
approval.
abstain. Sorry to interrupt. I thought you were done.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? 7-0, and that is adopted. Resolution 3547, rejecting the bids for the Mequon Civic Campus Parking Lot Improvement Project. Recommendation forthcoming from Public Works Committee.
I have to clarify that we voted 3-0 to approve the rejection of the bids.
Thank you, Alderman Bushy.
Is that a motion then?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve Resolution 3547. Call the roll.
Discussion. Oh, I just wanted to make a quick
You're
comment.
back.
What's that?
You're back.
Well, I'm not abstaining on this item. I note that I had a long conversation today with a owner of one of the 4 or 5 bigger paving companies in town. He made a couple of points. One, the cost of asphalt has gone up about $4 a ton since this bid, which $4 to $5, which is probably a $30,000 increase. So we are losing that because we're going to end up with, although he said, I don't know about spring, but odds are it's going to go up further, the cost of asphalt. So we ought to be relatively aggressive in re-engineering this plan and this contract. He also questions why we're having a paving company providing landscaping instead of directly contracting with a landscaper, because odds are Payne and Dolan or Publaki are adding some profit onto the landscaping when they're going out to provide the landscaping. And, so there are some real opportunities here for re-engineering this, which should save hopefully more than the additional cost of the paving that we probably will end up incurring in the spring. He also questions the whole silliness of the permeable bricks, but and the fact that we now have narrowed the number of contractors who probably are interested in bidding because of that. And we're getting some state money, but are we costing ourselves a lot by getting that state money? So I just thought I'd pass on at least what I learned today. But I still think we should reject the bids.
Alderman Schneider.
I would just like to say that we did discuss some of those issues of taking some of the items out and doing them themselves. And typically this time of year, asphalt's going to keep rising. You have that deadline coming of November, of Thanksgiving, where they can't get it anymore, where it's typically not, it's not done as much. So the price, supply and demand, they're going to raise the price to try to get the projects done more. I mean, they've all had their projects bid out for most of the year, a lot of these companies. Anything they get bonus, and they're going to jack up the price on you because they're going to get the jobs because they know you want to get it done. I think we'll probably save some more money in spring.
He said the cost of asphalt will be higher, but they will skinny back. The bids will skinny back because people are trying to fill their summers.
Correct.
Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Bushy?
Aye.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
Alderman Worth?
Aye.
Alderman Garrow?
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Nerben?
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk?
Aye.
8-0, and that is adopted. Resolution 3548, awarding a contract for the connection of the water lateral at the Public Safety Building to Cornerstone Plumbing at a total cost of $15,965. Recommendation forthcoming from Public Works.
This was also recommended 3-0, and I move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Alderman Worth.
If this is being done to accommodate a project, why isn't the developer of that project paying this cost?
They already extended the water service over there. This is just to hook up the lateral.
But we already had water over there, right, to the Public Safety Building?
It comes from one of the buildings we no longer have.
Sure, because the developer needed it to happen. Why are we incurring a cost
I'll bet we overlooked it.
to get a private development done? That's my question. I don't know that we have a choice now because of our contract, but I think we ought to be more, we ought to be looking at that type of thing as we go. This should have been, it's accommodating the development. The developer, we already had water. The developer who we're accommodating ought to then make sure they cover our cost. I don't know that we have a choice but to vote on this because we probably need water at the Public Safety Building, but in our future development agreements, we should make sure that we don't pick up a cost unless we've approved it on the front end because of somebody else's project. We specifically know about it on the front end.
Call the roll.
So I'm going to vote for it.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
Alderman Worth?
Aye.
Alderman Garrow?
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Nerben?
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk?
Aye.
Alderman Bushy?
Aye.
8-0, and that's adopted. Resolution 3543, awarding a contract for the force main replacement project at Sanitary Lift Station B, 5020 West Parkview, to Super Excavators of Menominee Falls in the amount of $170,400, recommended by the Sewer Utility District Commission.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Worth?
Aye.
Alderman Garrow?
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Nerben?
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk?
Aye.
Alderman Bushy?
Aye.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
8-0, and that resolution is adopted. Resolution 3549, approving the award of a contract for the sanitary sewer work in the Lac de Coeur subdivision to Visu Sewer of Pewaukee in the amount of $317,386.50, recommended by the Sewer Utility District Commission.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and second to approve. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Garrow?
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Nerben?
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk?
Aye.
Alderman Bushy?
Aye.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
Alderman Worth?
Aye.
8-0, and that resolution is adopted. Resolution 3550, approving the award of a contract for the 2018 sanitary sewer rehabilitation project to Visu Sewer of Pewaukee in the amount of $66,108, recommended by Sewer Utility District Commission.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Brian Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
Almost done. We have no specified unfinished business, no petitions, memorials, remonstrances, or communications, no specified miscellaneous new business. We have a potential closed session, Build a Park litigation update. The Common Council may convene into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85, paren 1, paren G, conferring with legal counsel for the government body who is rendering oral and written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved, and then may reconvene into open session to take such action as deemed appropriate.
Move to go into closed session.
Second.
Motion and a second to go into closed session. Call the roll.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider.
8-0. We will now go into closed session.